Welcome to the November the 1st, 1994 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we bring you the history of Grand Prairie of the past and the history that is being made at the present. We're very delighted today for our history tape number 235 to bring you a very special military couple. And by that we mean the very, I guess we call him the Emperor of Navy Dallas, which is not a very proper term to address Captain Jim Cannon.
Hello,
welcome
Ruthie.
to the set.
Thank you, Ruthie.
We're very glad to have you here as the commander of Navy Dallas installation. And Pat Cannon, it's wonderful to have you with us today also, because you certainly complement our interview, and we're looking forward to making a history tape, your entrance into Navy Dallas. We did have the privilege of a very mini interview with Captain Miller on his exit, but now we're very excited to be able to interview you today. And first of all, Captain Cannon, I'd like for you to look to your camera and maybe tell us a little bit about your genealogy. Give us your parents' name, including the full name, including the maiden name of your mother, and any siblings, and maybe a little something about that family historically.
Okay.
Right.
Well, my father's name is Jim, and my mother's name is Frida. Her maiden name was Gonzoph, Gonzoph. That's of Russian heritage. Mm-hmm. And I was born in Abington, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb a little bit north of Philadelphia. Okay. And in fact, Pat and I were born in the same hospital, which was Abington Hospital. And I have a brother, Kevin. He is about 12 years younger than I am. And I have a sister, Lorraine, who is a little more than a year older than I am. They all live in and around the Willow Grove, Pennsylvania area, which is, there's a Naval Air Station there, which is actually how I became initially interested in the Naval Air. Pat and I attended a Blue Angel Air Show there in and around 1967, and we watched the Blue Angels fly their F-11 Tigers, and it sort of planted a seed that later on I used to serve my country, is to pick the Navy as the service that I would serve. We have 3 children. My oldest is Jeff. He's 20 years old, and he's at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Our next oldest is my daughter Kristen. She's 16. She goes to Grand Prairie High School. She's a Gopher, and she plays on their tennis team, doing very well in her studies. And our youngest is a 10-year-old little boy, Danny, and he goes to Forest Hill Elementary School, just south of Interstate 20, and he's our hockey player. He plays ice hockey up at the Star Center, up where the Dallas Stars and the Dallas Freeze practice. So Pat and I met when we were in high school in our senior year, and we dated through the remainder of high school and college. And I went to graduate school for a year, and then I had to make a decision on what service I would serve in, because we had the draft back then, Ruthie. You know, you had to make a choice.
Yes.
So I picked the Navy because I remembered the Blue Angels, and I liked their uniforms better.
I see. Now that is very sound reasoning. Mm-hmm. All right. Captain Cannon, let's reverse just a little and go back to when Mr. Jim Cannon was a very young man. You said you attended the schools in Abbeville. When you were in the elementary school, tell us a little bit about Jim Cannon when he was about 7 years old. Up through elementary, did you have a very special teacher that was a mentor, someone in your life in the elementary grades that was very special to you, or someone in the family?
Well, I think I always enjoyed school. I went to a Catholic school, St. Helena's. Mm-hmm. I lived in Philadelphia. My father worked for the city of Philadelphia. And during my grade school days, I went to the same elementary school for 8 years. I can't think of any one particular teacher that I would have looked at as a mentor. However, I think my memories of grade school were very positive. It was very much a neighborhood school with a lot of good friends that still live in and around that same area.
Did you have any real special buddy in school that you still keep in contact with?
No, I really don't. I really don't. I think that when we go back, I had a real good friend who's somewhat of a television personality now. He does sports radio shows. He does some TV sports shows on the weekend, and it's kind of fun to see him and how he's changed over the years. But generally, when Pat and I have a chance to go home, we generally get home for about 2 days or 2.5 days max, and maximum. So our time is spent between our two families, because both our families live within about 4 miles of each other, and we try to split the time between my brothers and sisters and parents and aunts and Pat. So I really, someday when I get enough time, I would love to go back and see the old schools and the high school that I went to, which was in the same neighborhood. Of course, it's hard for my children to understand this, but I actually went to high school for 4 years and walked every day.
And walked each day. All right.
Praise the Lord.
All
Yes.
right. Well, that was good and healthy.
Well, I really wasn't that far.
Yes.
But I did, my son, when he was going to high school, couldn't believe it. So I said, if you doubt what I say, I said, ask your grandfather and ask him how many times did he give me the car to drive to high school. And my dad, true to form, truthful as always,
Yes.
said, I can't remember a single day.
All right.
But it was nice. It was an urban environment, so it was very easy. I think my high school was probably no more than about a mile from where I lived.
And now you already are in high school. We're going to leave elementary, even though I know there may be some points of interest that I should pick up there. But let's get to high school. What was your chief interest during high school, and maybe a mentor there?
Well, I think probably as I got a little more older and mature, there were some teachers that I really respected, mostly the science and math teachers that I liked. I also went to a Catholic high school, which we were taught predominantly by priests, who were usually pretty straight as far as disciplinarians and what was expected of us as students. So I think that they sort of set the tone that our classrooms were very much disciplined. And if you violated the rules, then you, of course, paid the penalties. I did not find that unusual at all at the time, and look back on it as really a great education. And in fact, I think probably one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given, other than a good family, has been a great education. So I use that all the time. It helped me have an interest in learning, and my interests have always been pretty much liberal arts. I mean, I liked math, but I really liked history and English, and that was really the strong education that we had back then in the early and middle 60s.
Academics or athletics?
Mostly academics. I played some athletics, but not very much. I never played on any varsity team, as that matter. I went to a school that had a fairly large high school. We had over 4,000 students in the high school that I went to, and so it was very competitive. And although we played lots of intramural sports, I never lettered in any specific sport. So academics was probably more, in my memory, what I remember most from high school, and the friendships that we made.
Now, Miss Pat, would you look out into your camera and let's talk about Miss Pat and living and being born in the same hospital and marrying in the area. Tell us a little bit about your life and what you've done with it up until where we are with the captain.
Well, Ruthie, I grew up in the area around Philadelphia. My mother's name, her maiden name is Johnson, Mary Johnson. My father was Craig Bruger, and he is deceased. He died when I was a senior in high school. And I have an older sister, Nancy. She's a nurse in Philadelphia. My brother Craig is a priest, and he is also a principal in a high school in Philadelphia. And my younger brother Paul is a manager of an auto parts store. And they all live in the general area. And my sister's children, her oldest is expecting her first child. And I spent my education through elementary and high school and also college within the Catholic school system. And I think that's partly what has shaped our lives and through our upbringing, thanks to our parents. And I've always had a real ability to connect with education and children, and that's where my life has led. And I graduated with a teaching degree in elementary education, and I've taught in Philadelphia. And once we were married, because of the military moves And so frequently, I spent most of my time volunteering in the elementary school. And right now, I'm doing some substituting at Florence Hill, where my youngest son, Dan, goes to school, and also some volunteering in the school also. And pretty much, my children have been my life for the last 20 years, and my free time has been spent in the elementary schools.
Would you say that being the wife of a Navy person is more exciting than being stationed at one single unit place?
Well, for us, we've really taken advantage of all the moves that we've had, and I think it's been a real positive experience. I feel real fortunate and able, with the ability to go to so many different bases and meet so many people. And we've been to Europe. We've traveled throughout Europe while Jim had a Mediterranean cruise. My children have greatly benefited from all of the moves. They've learned certainly to be adaptable, and I can see that it has made them stronger. They're much more open to new ideas and new people, and I think it's been a great benefit to all of us.
Well, as the First Lady of Navy Dallas, I know that you're excited about your responsibilities there in this wonderful transition since Navy Dallas somewhat is phasing out. One day we hear it's going to be gone in '94, then we hear it's going to be gone in '95, and then they push it up to '97, so you may have a very exciting stay at Navy Dallas, and I know you're looking forward to your role as being the wife of the CO.
Yes, I think that already we have made some contacts within the Navy Dallas and also within Fort Worth, and we'll be involved in the Wives Club and any other events and entertaining that come up between the two bases.
That's wonderful. All right, let's get back to Captain Jim. I know that by a former interview that you're into history, and I'd like for you to tell us exactly what got you on that trek.
Well, I think that there was a philosopher that said that those who do not know history are damned to repeat it. And I kind of believe that. I think that to understand so much in the news today, for instance, what's going on in what used to be the old Yugoslavia in Bosnia, and to understand the Croats and the Serbs and the Muslims and why they have such deep-seated hatreds of each other, goes back to maybe understanding the way Europe was in the 1914 time frame. I think anything, if you know the history of this country, I think it helps you understand how we've arrived at where we are today. So I think history, to me, has meaning in that regard. It's not as it was never as dry to me as sometimes some of my fellow students might think of it. I thought of it as a continuing evolution, and by knowing it, maybe a better understanding of why people act the way they do.
I'd like for you to tell us a little bit more about the story of the Blue Angels, and then what happened to Mr. Jim after you made up your mind to get into the Navy, and where you've been along the way.
Well, like I said, we saw the Blues when we were in high school together, and it was interesting to me to all of a sudden see a Navy airplane where U.S. Navy was painted on the side of it. My ideation at the time was that the Air Force actually flew airplanes off Navy carriers. It wasn't until I saw the Blues that I realized that the Navy had its own aircraft. So that was sort of a wake-up call. When it came time for me to make a decision, my choice was basically Air Force or to come into the Navy under a voluntary program that would be anywhere from 4 to 6 years of a commitment, or to allow to just be drafted into the selective service system, which would have only been 2 years at the time, but I would have lost some control over my life. I had a great education up to that time. I was taking European history at St. John's University in New York, working on my graduate degree, and I really felt that there would be a lot more to be gained if I went into the Navy, tried to get into aviation, have the opportunity to travel, and to maybe possibly visit some sites that I had studied about. I had already been to Europe twice before that while I was in college, and I always found that it was really fascinating to go to a place like London and to go into something like the Tower of London to see not only the crown jewels, but also all the armament that exists there, the history that exists there, the myths that surround the Tower of London, and also all the famous people that lived and died there. So these things kind of intertwine as to liking the history. There's a lot of tradition in the Navy, and I think the tradition of its uniform, its mission in protecting this country is something that has always fascinated me, and that I think is it's been kind of natural.
After those first 4 years, then what happened to Mr. Jim?
In the Navy?
Yes.
Well, my first 4 years were spent in going through the basic flight training, getting assigned to an F-4 replacement squadron, which was the Phantom. We moved to Virginia Beach, was one of our first really great moves. We lived in Virginia Beach, Virginia for almost 5 years while I went on my first 2 cruises on John F. Kennedy. It was the same squadron. However, my first cruise in 1973 was in Phantoms, and then our squadron was picked to be the first East Coast squadron to get the brand new F-14 Tomcat. So,
oh, how wonderful.
Right. So that was an exciting time. What was good was we were faced with new technology to learn. It was a trip to California, a quick 8-month cross-country trip to learn a new airplane and get back for our next cruise. But it gave us a long enough period of time between cruises where we decided to have our first child, which is Jeff, our 20-year-old. So he was born in California when I was going through the F-14 transition. We moved back in approximately July of 1974 back to make my second cruise in '95 on Kennedy, and that was the first East Coast deployment of the F-14. At the end of that cruise, I had served my entire 5 years of obligated service, and I made the decision to get out of the United States Navy and to pursue reserve management, which is the job I'm in now, which is a full-time, but you had to, back then, get off active duty, apply for it, and I was picked back up to come back and manage the reserve program.
All right. And prior to Navy Dallas, this is your second tour.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us, before your first tour at Navy Dallas, what brought you there and what happened in the interim?
Well, my first tour was at Oceana, which is Virginia Beach, and my next tour and my first tour as a reserve program manager was at NAS Miramar, which is Fightertown, where the movie Top Gun was filmed. Well, I went out there and I joined an F-4 squadron for 3 years, VF-302, and at the end of my first 3-year tour in the reserve, I was given orders to come out here to be a superheat VF-202 at Navy Dallas. That was our first tour.
And who was the commanding officer at that time?
The day that I checked aboard VF-202, Ken Fox was, Commander Ken Fox was my commanding officer. He was a test pilot. He was also a Pan American pilot in commercial airlines.
All right. And then from there, after leaving Navy Dallas on the first tour, where'd you go?
We went back to Miramar to rejoin my original squadron, VF-302. I went back to do my department head tours for about 3 years. Again, we were flying Phantoms. Right at the end of that tour, the Naval Reserve transitioned back to the F-14, so we went back and caught up with new equipment. That was 1983, 1984 timeframe. From that tour, we moved to New Orleans, where I was a program manager for fighter and fighter reconnaissance. We lived in a suburb of New Orleans for 2 years, and then another move back to California, Miramar, for my tour as executive officer and CO of the same squadron, VF-302.
Okay.
And these moves come fast and furious.
Yes. And you had served, I believe, with Captain Miller prior to coming in here?
Yeah, well, I haven't quite yet met Captain Miller. At this time, after being CO, I was selected to be an Air Wing commander, which the Air Wing was located at Cecil Field in Jacksonville, Florida. So that was the move where we moved from Miramar, San Diego, all the way to Cecil Field, and I relieved Captain Miller as Air Wing 20.
So this is your second relief to Captain Miller?
Yes, it is.
That's very exciting, isn't it?
It was. It's very unusual, I mean, that you would ever relieve the same person twice, but I've directly benefited from that because of the job that Captain Miller had done at both CAG 20 and here in Navy Dallas. It's really a pleasure to follow him as a commanding officer. He does a fine job. He really takes care of the people, and the commands show it. They're very, very good.
The downsizing of Navy Dallas now, that all of the powers that be have decided that we must fade into the sunset. How are you enjoying this tour?
Well, this tour offers very unique challenges but also, I would have to say, very unique opportunities. The Navy is getting smaller. It has to. With the fall of the Soviet Empire, there's only so much money that Congress is willing to spend on readiness, and that money has to go to the operating forces. So the government, the United States government and its military, has offered to cut down what we call its infrastructure, which is the components of the active forces that are not forward deployed. So we want to keep our carriers ever battle ready, and if we have a finite number of dollars, then we are trying to take our training bases and our aviation depots down to a level that will free up enough money to keep the carriers, the submarines, and the surface combatants at the highest level of readiness. So a lot of the downsizing, really, Ruthie, is at the Navy's request.
Yes.
The Navy wants to do this because they understand the restricted budgets that are going to that we will have at least through the turn of the century.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, you had a very exciting experience because I believe that in concert with the new opening of the Fort Worth facility, you had an opportunity to learn and tell us a little bit about that very wonderful day that you had that we're going to have on video pretty soon.
Good.
On this show. Tell us about that.
Well, as you know, all military budgets begin on October 1st. That's the beginning of our fiscal year. And on 1 October, we inherited the running of the new Naval Air Station Fort Worth, the Joint Reserve Base, Carswell Field. We decided to celebrate that with a ceremony in which our bosses were there, both Admiral Hall, who is Commander Naval Reserve Force, and Admiral Jim Olson, former CO of NAS Dallas, who was Commander Naval Air Reserve Force, joined us on the podium with Congressman Pete Guerin. And they gave their speeches, and we had a joint congregation of all the forces that will be stationed at the Joint Reserve Base, which includes the Air Force, the United States Marine Corps, the United States Navy and Army, and a small Coast Guard contingent out in ranks. So it was a very impressive ceremony, a ceremony that showed that the military is, by nature of downsizing, being forced more and more to work together and to work at a joint facility to consolidate and reconstitute closing bases that are affected under the base relocation and closure legislation.
With this move, do you foresee that you may still be the CO when the final transition is made, or will your tour of duty be over and someone else be in charge?
Well, I'm hoping very much to be the CO at the time that the BRAC initiatives reach their fruition. I was sent here with a 2-year set of orders to move Navy Dallas to NAS Fort Worth. So right now we're on schedule. In fact, recently we've got a fairly large contract, construction contract, that we're beginning construction out at Fort Worth to change some of the facilities for the better, and to make them house units like our Marine C-130 squadrons and our C-9 squadrons that will be, the Marines of course are there already, operating in an older hangar, but we're going to upgrade the hangars so that we can use that facility for the next 30 years.
That's wonderful. I'm going to let you rest a minute.
Thank you.
Miss Pat,
Yes.
he's been front and center just long enough. I'd like for you to look out into your camera and let the young ladies know in our viewing audience how exciting it is to be a Navy wife, and that you would encourage them in any way you'd like to. Just give them a little pep talk. Would you like to do that?
Well, yes, Ruthie. I think that I've had just the best opportunity in the world to be married to Jim and be able to experience life in the military. Growing up, we stayed in the same town until I was 23 years old, and started life as a Navy wife, and going to new places, making new friends. It's always been a very positive experience. You really develop a closeness every squadron that you're in, every duty station, every tour that you make. You really make close friends. You're away from your families. It's a wonderful opportunity to see different parts of the country. I've been able to go to Europe twice and travel throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. And you develop friendships with women and their children and their husbands that will last a lifetime. And I can't think of any better way to spend your days than being a part of the United States military. And you have a great sense of patriotism, and you have friends all over the country. Many times we cross paths in different duty stations, and you get to know people a little bit better. The second time around, you get to see other wives, children's grow along with your own and make comparisons and keep in touch with these people who really enrich your lives. I mean, it's just a great experience for all of us, and I'd recommend it to anyone. And we've always taught the children and feel ourselves that every move that we make, we have to get involved in the community as quickly as possible and make it a part of our lives and take the good with us and not look like we're leaving friends behind, but we're able to take a little bit of the best of every town that we're in and the people that we keep close to our hearts.
Oh, thank you. Now, Captain Cannon, you get the last word. You have about 2 minutes. 1 minute, they said, I want you to look out into your camera, tell us how glad you are to be at Navy Dallas, and what will you do with the rest of your life after you're out of the Navy? If you can do that in about a minute, we'd love it.
Well, I consider this one great opportunity. And in my tour here, whether it's for a remaining 1 year and 9 months or more, I hope, would be to be successful and to create a facility that would be good for the state of Texas and would be good for our military joint to provide a service to the taxpayers that would really be a true dividend. I love the Navy, and I'm really, sometimes I think back and smile when I realize how much of part of it has become in my life with hardly even thinking about it. So it's been a great lifestyle for us, and I know on this Veterans Day we should always take the time to remember the sacrifices that went before us for the men and women who gave their lives so that I could come here today and be with such two beautiful women to talk about the nice things about our country and the reason why it's great to be in the United States Navy today.
That's wonderful. I want to thank you two wonderful people for making this history tape so exciting. And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.